In this video, I'm going to take a look at 3 examples from Chapter 1, Section 4, Exercise 1. All of the examples in this exercise are in fact deductive. We're going to put induction on the back burner for now. They are again all deductive, so we don't need to worry about as much. That's going to be given. What we need to figure out is, first of all, are they valid or invalid? And then secondly, is the argument either sound or unsound? And the definition of each is handled in a different video altogether, but it might be worth a quick recap. A valid argument is a deductive argument in which it's impossible to have a false conclusion given true premises. Invalid, it is possible to have that. Sound versus unsound. For a deductive argument to be sound, 2 conditions must be met. First of all, it's going to be valid, and secondly, it actually has to have all true premises. If one of those 2 is missing, either it's invalid, in which case it's automatically unsound, or it's valid, but it's got a single false premise. In that case, it'd be unsound. And again, all that's covered in the text, all that's covered in another video. I'm going to assume that you've watched that you're familiar with the terms. Now let's get to the important part here, practicing. Practice before the test. So I'll just take a look at 3 examples. As always, let me know if you have questions. I'll create, as always, a video lecture if there's a particular problem that you have questions about, concerns about. So problem 1. Since Moby Dick was written by Shakespeare, and Moby Dick is a science fiction novel, it follows that Shakespeare wrote a science fiction novel. So we know, we're told it's deductive. First of all, is it valid or invalid? And this one would be valid. If Shakespeare actually wrote Moby Dick, and Moby Dick is a science fiction novel, then obviously enough, it must be the case that Shakespeare wrote a science fiction novel. So this one's valid. The only remaining task here, is it sound or is it unsound? Now, one of the conditions is met for it to be sound. It's valid. If it were invalid, it would automatically be unsound. The only remaining question is this: does it have all true premises? And here it's just assumed that this is common, general background information. You would have to bring this information to the problem. If you didn't know it, you wouldn't be able to figure it out. But Shakespeare, of course, didn't actually write Moby Dick. It was written by Melville. So that part is actually false. Since Moby Dick was written by Shakespeare, well, no. And the truth value of this premise, again, has no impact on whether or not it's valid. We're going to assume that the premises are true, that is, when testing for validity. So this one's valid, but it's got a false premise, so therefore it's unsound. Let's take a look at number 3. If George Washington was beheaded, then George Washington died. And that stands to reason, right? If his head was chopped off, then he's going to die. George Washington died. That's also true. Therefore, George Washington was beheaded. So let's break this one down. There's P1. Good practice identifying the structure of an argument, picking out those premises, picking out the conclusion. So P1. If Washington was beheaded, then Washington died. And notice that P1 takes the form of a conditional statement. That too, of course, was covered in an earlier video. But let's tie it all together, bring all these concepts together. It's a conditional statement. It's an if-then statement. There's the antecedent, that which directly follows the if. Washington was beheaded. There is the consequent, that which directly follows the then. So there's P1, there's P2, Washington died, and there's the conclusion. Therefore, conclusion indicator, let's bring it all together. Therefore, Washington was beheaded. So P1, let's go so far as to write this one out formally. P1, P2, and there's our conclusion. If Washington was beheaded, then he died. Washington did in fact die. Therefore, he was beheaded. And I'm just abbreviating there, obviously. B, beheaded, D, died. So is this one a valid argument form? is it the case that if these two are true, P1 and P2, that one has to be true? And that doesn't follow. This one is invalid. Specifically, this is a fallacy known as affirming the consequent. It doesn't follow with necessity that if these two are true, that one's got to be true. And since we know it to be invalid, we automatically know that it's unsound. We don't even need to bother with, well, are the premises true? If it's invalid, it's automatically rendered unsound. And you can plug in your own examples here. Let's scrap this example. Let's just do the same structure here if you're struggling to see why it's invalid. If the dog barks, then the cat will run away. And I know my letters don't really make sense now for this example, but same structure. If the dog barks, then the cat will run away. The cat ran away, so therefore the dog is barking. Well, the cat could have run away for any other reason. Maybe the dog's barking, but that doesn't follow necessarily. Same deal here. If Washington was beheaded, then Washington died. Washington died. Maybe he was beheaded, and that was the cause of death. Maybe he died of natural causes. Maybe it was old age. Maybe he died in war. He could have been beheaded, but it doesn't follow necessarily that because he died, therefore he was beheaded. So it's invalid, and again, that makes it automatically unsound. So let's take a look at one last example here. I'll go through this one pretty quickly. I think it's pretty straightforward as it turns out. The longest river in South America is the Amazon. And again, it's assumed that you've got general background information. I suppose if you needed to, you could do a Google search. But this, I think, is pretty common knowledge. Longest river in South America is the Amazon. I'll go ahead and put a T there, that's true. And the Amazon flows through Brazil. That's also true. You can verify that if you like. Therefore, there's our conclusion. Conclusion indicator, of course, obvious one. The longest river in South America flows through Brazil. So if these two are true, longest river in South America is the Amazon. The Amazon flows through Brazil. Therefore, the longest river flows through Brazil. That's got to be the case. That's got to be the case. So this one's valid, and I've already noted here the premises are actually true. So this one then is sound. Both conditions are met. It's valid, check. It's got true premises, check. So that means it's sound.